Hi, my kinder friends. Are you ready for math with Miss Morris? For the next few weeks, we will be exploring measurement. And there are many ways that we can measure objects. The first way is by looking at the length of an object. We will be looking at objects and comparing them. And this week, you will use words like longer or shorter or equal to or the same. So let's get started. I thought we could play a game before we look into our learning packet. All right? Now, when we're looking at an object and we're comparing it to another object to see which item is longer or shorter, we have to line them up very carefully. So I brought some pictures and we will compare them and decide which item is longer or shorter. Now, do you see Miss Morris has lined up the edge of the paper here? Okay, now that way we can look at the items and see which one is longer. The crayon on the bottom, the red one, or the crayon on the top, the orange. Which crayon is longer? The red one, you're right. So that means the orange crayon on top is the smaller one. Okay, oh, how about this? 2 caterpillars. I've lined them up where the edges are the same there. Now let's look closely. Which caterpillar is longer? The one on the top, you're right. The caterpillar on the bottom is shorter. Very good. So I brought a book that is going to help us with our learning packet activity. And the name of our book is How Big is a Foot? And it was written and illustrated by Rolf Miller. Okay, let's see. Once upon a time, there lived a king and his wife, the queen. They were a happy couple, for they had everything in the world. However, when the queen's birthday came near, the king had a problem. What could he give someone who had everything? The king thought and thought and thought until suddenly he had an idea. He would give the queen a bed. The queen did not have a bed because at the time, beds had not been invented. So even someone who had everything did not have a bed. The king called the prime minister and asked him to please have a bed made. The prime minister called the chief carpenter and asked him to please have a bed made. The chief carpenter called the apprentice and told him to make a bed. How big is a bed? Asked the apprentice, who didn't know because nobody had ever seen a bed. How big is a bed? The carpenter asked the prime minister. A good question, said the prime minister. And he asked the king, how big is a bed? The king thought and thought and thought until suddenly he had an idea. The bed must be big enough to fit the queen. The king called the queen. He told her to put on her new pajamas and told her to lie on the floor. The king took off his shoes with his big feet, walked carefully around the queen, and he counted that the bed must be 3 feet wide and 6 feet long to be big enough to fit the queen, including the crown, which the queen sometimes liked to wear in her sleep. The king said thank you to the queen. He told the prime minister, who told the chief carpenter, who told the apprentice the bed must be 3 feet wide and 6 feet long to be big enough to fit the queen, including her crown, which she sometimes liked to wear in her sleep. The apprentice said thank you and took off his shoes, and with his little feet he measured 3 feet wide and 6 feet long and made a bed to fit the queen. When the king saw the bed, he thought it was beautiful. He could not wait for the queen's birthday. Instead, he called the queen at once and told her to put on her new pajamas. Then he brought out the bed and told the king to try it. But the bed was much too small for the queen. Oh, let's see. The king was so angry. He immediately called the prime minister, who called the chief carpenter, who called the jailer, who threw the apprentice in jail. The apprentice was unhappy. Why was the bed too small for the queen? He thought and he thought and he thought until suddenly he had an idea. A bed was 3 king's feet wide and 6 king's feet long. That was naturally a bigger bed than the apprentice's bed. I can make a bed to fit the queen if I know the size of the king's foot. He explained this to the jailer, who explained it to the chief carpenter, who explained it to the prime minister, who explained it to the king, who was much too busy to go to jail. Instead, the king took off one shoe and called a famous sculptor. The sculptor made an exact marble copy of the king's foot. This was sent to the jail. The apprentice took a marble copy of the king's foot, and when he measured it, 3 feet wide and 6 feet long, he built a bed to fit the queen. The bed was ready just in time for the queen's birthday. The king called the queen and told her to put on her new pajamas. Then he brought out the new bed and told the queen to try it. The queen got into the bed, and the bed fit the queen perfectly, including the crown, which she liked to wear sometimes in her sleep. It was the nicest gift she'd ever received. The king was very happy. He immediately called the apprentice from jail and made him a royal prince. He ordered a big parade, and all of the people came out to cheer the little apprentice prince. And forever after, anyone who wanted to measure anything used a copy of the king's foot. And when someone said, "My bed is 6 feet long and 3 feet wide," everyone knew exactly how big it was. They used the king's foot, didn't they? How great is that? Well, your learning packet has a fun page called How Big is a Foot? Now, we don't have the king's foot size, but you are going to use your very own shoe to go around the house and find things that are shorter than your shoe, and you will draw a picture or write the word in these rectangles right here. These items are shorter than your shoe. Then you're going to go around the house and find items that are longer than your shoe and put them right here in this column. And then you might find some items that are equal to or the same size as your shoe, and you will fill in the chart. All right, that is going to be so fun. Later this week, you will get to listen to another story, one of my favorite stories, Jack and the Beanstalk. And we are going to be looking at this page called Measure It. And these are fun pictures from Jack and the Beanstalk story. And you're going to get to use a bean ruler to measure your items. All right, so 2 fun measuring activities. And Miss Morris will see you again soon.